Hello and welcome to the Name on the Trophy podcast, the Manchester United podcast and YouTube show with me, Dominic Booth. We're going to be doing some of these special episodes with data expert Alex Wylie, who joins me from Saber Sports, which is a data analytics app and platform. Alex specialises in football and he's going to help me analyse Manchester United's striking situation today in the what we're going to call the post-Cristiano Ronaldo era. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Disclaimer as well, Alex and I are very good friends outside of football and professional realms. So if we go into
20 plus years.
Yeah, if we go into some sort of cat fighting over our opinions about players, then that's the reason for that. Best man at each other's wedding, etc.
Just remember that mine's all backed up with stats and Dom's is all backed up with opinion.
Journalistic narrative is going to take over. So we'll start with recapping the Ronaldo situation. There's obviously a lot to go back on in terms of the journalistic narrative side of it, if you want to angle it that way. And we probably don't need to tread over the old ground with Piers Morgan interview and reasons for leaving. But where I want to bring you in, Alex, is the footballing side of things and the numbers actually behind Ronaldo's year and a half at United, and maybe how the numbers didn't justify Ronaldo's outburst.
It's a bit of a strange one, really. He started off pretty well. I mean, we're all pretty happy with his first season. And then his second season, I mean, I've got the numbers in front of me now. The drop-off has actually been remarkable. So last season, 0.57 expected goals. Now, shall I give a little brief overview of what expected goals are, or are we happy to move on with that?
It assumes some knowledge, but how would you describe it for the layman?
It's actually quite simple when you really break it down. I don't think people are a particularly big fan of the name, but really all it does is measure the quality of a chance, based on the location, whether it was hit with the foot or the head. Use all that. You look at 10,000, 20,000 shots, you see the likelihood of that going into the back of the net. And then from that, you can work out the quality of a chance. But like you talk to anyone in football, a shot from 40 yards out is not the same as a one-on-one. So you need something that differentiates between the two. And that's basically what expected goals gives you. And it's also important to note that expected goals is a better predictor of future performance than actual goal scoring, which is why the stats nerds quite like using it, and is why I'm going to mention it quite a lot today. So Ronaldo, 0.57 expected goals last season, which is very good. And then we're talking like 85th percentile in top 5 European leagues. I mean, it's really, really good numbers. This season, it's 0.33, which is a 42% decrease, which honestly, Dom, that is absolutely phenomenal. Like, you just don't see that. And I know he's old, and I know he's gone from being 36 to 37, but that kind of decrease,
dramatic.
It is dramatic, and it's not. I don't think it's reflective of his ability. I think it speaks to something else. It speaks to not a lot of games to actually be looking at, but it also speaks to, I'm not sure if it's confidence or what, but it is a remarkable decrease. I mean, his expected assists as well, which is effectively the same as expected goals, but rather than giving credit to the guy who takes the shot, you're giving it to the guy who makes the pass. That also coincidentally has gone down 42%. So we are talking about a dramatic decrease over the 2 seasons. Dramatic.
And Ronaldo's actual goal number this season for United was 3 goals, and I think 2 penalties. Was that those?
Yeah.
And one of them was against Sheriff. So really, expected goals has penalties play a big role in expected goals, right? Because I think, is it 0.77?
Yeah, so I've actually, with those numbers I put out there, it's actually taken penalties out for the very simple reason. So
he should have scored 3 and then 2 penalties, basically.
It's good. I've not got the expected goal totals, but per 90, it's 0.33 per 90. So basically, you're expecting him to score 1 in 3
for
and 90 minutes.
He played 12 games, I think. But in terms of last season to this season, you think that expected goals is so different but and his actual performances, the eye test, most fans would say was dramatically different as well. So is that just chickens coming home to roost from the perspective of he doesn't fit into the side, which was the narrative and the idea that everyone had last season, despite so many goals, that he actually United functioned better without him? That was the suspicion.
He's quite a unique player, Ronaldo, in that I feel he's one of the few players that can have a great game and the team also perform worse as a result in a strange way, because he's so selfish with a lot of his play. I mean, let's be honest. Ronaldo now will literally get the ball and shoot from wherever he can. His expected goals and goal numbers and things like that can look quite good, whilst almost every player around him's stats will take a hit because of it. And United's performances won't be good either. I mean, like I said, Ronaldo was good last season, but United weren't. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But it is quite unique in that regard. Almost every other player, you feel they have a good performance, the team tends to benefit from that. But Ronaldo, he's almost in a world of his own once again in that regard, and that he can sort of bring the team down even when he's playing well. You know, this season, he's playing badly and the team also plays badly. I mean, it's the worst of both, really.
But the reality was last season then that we know United didn't play well, and we know that a lot of other players dropped off from the form they've been showing before Ronaldo's arrival. So Bruno Fernandes, Marcus Rashford are probably the two most sort of striking examples. And we've seen those two players return to form this season and produce not just better numbers, but just better performances. And that can't be a coincidence.
I don't think it is. I mean, Ronaldo, just from his first period at United, I'll always love to some extent. But the truth is, him going is good for United. It's not just for the dressing room, things like that, but just in terms of on the ball, on the pitch performances. United, I think, will improve with him not being there, both on the ball and off the ball. I mean, he offers nothing off the ball. And there's one thing Ten Hag has always shown is he wants strikers who are willing and able to press. And he doesn't do that either. So I think him not being there can only be good for us.
Well, that's a good segue into the next part of the podcast. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but that was really good. Because we do want to discuss this main subject of this is striking replacements for United after the Ronaldo era, so January and the summer. We've got a list of some realistic and some potentially less realistic. And there'll also be some that Alex will suggest because of stats and that I will say is not going to happen because of the reality. Yes. But that's the profile, right, that United want. Someone who will press, someone that will contribute to the general play. It'll drop deep. They'll make all sorts of runs into the channels.
I think so. So when I sat down to come up with these names, I found it a little difficult knowing exactly what United would want and what Ten Hag would want, because at Ajax, he's had a variety of strikers that he's used, you know, whether it be Tadic as sort of like a false pressing number 9, or Huntelaar, who's like the most traditional fox in the box you can think of, or Haller, who's like a target man. He's had such a variety, and it's hard to know exactly what he would want. But I think with the United team as it is and the type of forwards we have, exactly what you said, that player who can help a bit with the build-up, who will press. That's the one thing, actually, I think I'm almost certain he wants, is someone who will do a bit of pressing. I did find it difficult to know exactly what it is that he wants. So my list, you know, these players are all slightly different in their own way. You know, none of them fit into an exact box.
Let's go on to your list that the numbers say would be a good fit for United. And then I'll knock them down and I'll tell you who realistically United might be able to sign.
Yeah, I actually feel like my first one is probably the easiest to knock down, but might be actually the most realistic. It's Matheus Cunha at Atleti. So through our app, so basically we've got an app that can rate every player in world football and give them a score. You know, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on under the hood, but basically what you get at the end of it is a score that almost looks similar to a FIFA score, but it's using real life player data. And Matheus Cunha gets an 82. So for full clarity, Ronaldo is currently on an 83. So it's looking at Ronaldo's last year, not last season. The main reason being that we can then compare him to every footballer in the world. The seasons start at different times, etc. So Matheus Cunha is an 82, but he is 24, which means he should theoretically improve. Now, I know some people will be listening to this and they'll say, well, Matheus Cunha has basically not scored a goal this season, and he hasn't. But if you actually look at his expected goals, what we spoke about before, he's basically at 0.5 expected goals per 90. So you're expecting him to score 1 in 2. He's massively underperforming that. I think he's around 0.1 to 0.2 actual goals, which some people might argue matters more. But his expected assists, also 0.21. Both of that puts him in the 80th percentile for a top 5 European striker. He presses better than almost any forward, I think, around. I think he's in like the 98th, 99th percentile for defensive duels, tackles, things like that. He can play on either wing, which gives him a bit of versatility. And he's quite good at dropping deep. And I guess most importantly, he's available. I mean, we can see he was linked with United over the summer. He's been linked with Wolves recently, funnily enough. And I only think it's his underperformance in actual goals, putting in these chances, that hasn't had him linked to bigger clubs, because I think he's a brilliant player. But I know you're going to come back and say that you don't think he is.
Well, I didn't know that much about Matheus Cunha until United were linked with him in the summer, and it was £42 million suggested move in August that came into reports. I don't think the reports were particularly well sourced. They were from some sort of, I'd say, more peripheral outlets than the ones that have been reporting the other targets that we'll talk about later. But I know that he is like a presser, an expert presser. And if that's what United want, and if they want obviously someone with that age profile, then I don't see him not being. I think he will be on their list at the moment when they sit down. They probably have been sitting down over the past few weeks when the World Cup's been on to look at the profile of players. So I'm not going to completely debunk him, but I will ask on terms of Ronaldo. He's not a Ronaldo comparison. Probably none of these players are direct Ronaldo.
No, which. That's kind of what I was getting at before. I don't think United will want to replace Ronaldo stylistically, because stylistically, Ronaldo just doesn't fit the Ten Hag profile. I know Ten Hag was very positive in the press and always defended him and said he's one of the best players of all time, etc., etc., etc. But the truth is, the way Ronaldo plays, I just cannot see how that fits into a Ten Hag system. Even if you have a pressing system where Ronaldo doesn't do the pressing, but all the players do it around him. Once you're one player down in a pressing system, it becomes so much less effective. So I just can't see why Ten Hag would go, I need someone who's just like Ronaldo to replace him. I can't see it happening.
United fans are all too familiar with a sort of asymmetric press where a couple of players go and a couple of players don't back them up. Bruno Fernandes chasing the keeper down for 30 yards and it hasn't functioned.
It's just the most pointless thing ever. You might as well just sit off and defend, because if you're going to have a press that's like 1 or 2 players that can just get played around, you're then 1 or 2 players down behind the ball. The team against you can progress quite quickly, and before you know it, you can be in these difficult defensive transitions that would be a lot easier if you just sat back and defended. It doesn't make sense to do 1 or 2 man presses. I know fans like it. I'm sure fans might like seeing Bruno Fernandes busting a gut to try and close a player down, but it very rarely achieves anything. If anything, has a more negative effect on actually winning football games, which is surely what we want.
Yeah, and as we're both fans and as regular watchers, we've both seen United's best performances under Ten Hag, and even last season under Rangnick and Solskjaer. They came when they did sit deeper and counter-attacked, and there's been very few really good pressing performances. I think maybe the 2-0 win over Tottenham this season, which obviously Ronaldo played no part in, was probably the most all-round performance pressing-wise. Let's get on to the next person on your list then, Alex.
Okay. Yeah, so the next person on my list is a player that not very few people, but he wouldn't be a household name pre-World Cup. post-World Cup, a lot more people will be talking about him, and it's Gonçalo Ramos at Benfica, who again gets an 82 Sabre score based on his performances in the Portuguese league. His expected goals in the last year is 0.7, which is phenomenal. Now, it is worth saying that the Portuguese league is not as strong as the Premier League. And it's also worth saying that on our consultancy side, we take that into consideration. We adjust those kind of outputs down if we're to say they're going to make that jump up. But 0.7 expected goals in the Portuguese league is very, very good. It's phenomenal. He's also a presser. He does quite a lot of defensive work. He's not as quick and dynamic as Cunha. He's slightly more of a traditional number 9. He's a little slower in the way that he goes about his movement and things like that. But he's very strong. And I think, and this is more watching him than actual stats, I think he's a very good finisher. And I know I might be slightly skewed based on that one finish from the World Cup, which is exactly what I shouldn't care about.
Because he scored a hat-trick when Ronaldo didn't play in the quarter-final of the World Cup.
And also he scored that goal, there was a really tight angle and you just couldn't see any way in which he could finish that. And you've seen it, for Benfica as well. I think he is a good finisher. But again, different profile to Cunha, but does press. So I could see why United would like that.
Well, yeah, it was the last 16 of the World Cup, wasn't it, actually? That's 6-1 against Switzerland when Fernando Santos surprised everybody by dropping Ronaldo and bringing in Gonçalo Ramos. And I think a lot of people, I'd only just heard the name, to be honest, but a lot of people wouldn't have heard the name at all before then. And I think the way the commentators, I can't remember who was commentating, I think it might be Clive Tilsley, went on about Ramos that night was as if he was a complete unknown, plucked from obscurity. And then everyone said, well, he's actually scored 14 goals in the Portuguese league this year. But those numbers in the Portuguese league, Bruno Fernandes had really impressive numbers from the Portuguese league. And everyone said, well, Portuguese league tax, you can't really replicate that in the Prem. And then he hit the ground running for United. So maybe you can't discount
Luis Diaz as well.
Yeah, he was fantastic when he came to Liverpool straight away. I think it's one of those where it's quite hit and miss. I think the Dutch league has a similar reputation where some people can replicate that form and some people can't.
Yeah, I mean, the Dutch league is very easy to score in. Not just because in terms of quality or things like that, but it's so open, the Dutch league, that there is more of a Dutch league tax than a Portuguese league tax. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of good players that have come out of Portugal over the last 5 or so years. I mean, Liverpool, I hate to say it, but they've got one of the best recruitment departments in the world, and they quite often shop into the Portuguese league. I think people are still, I guess the jury's still out on Darwin Núñez. I think he's a fantastic player, but he's a very awkward looking player. But again, that's another player that Liverpool have taken out the Portuguese league for big money. And when someone's getting 0.7 expected goals at 21 years old in that same league, you sit up and take notice. But look, he's going to have a World Cup premium. He's going to be really expensive.
Well, that was the next point I was going to come on to there. That reportedly, according to reports from Portugal, 120 million euro release clause in Ramos' contract, and he's contracted until 2026. So I'm going to stick this one in the unlikely pile at the moment.
Okay.
It may well be that United do go back in for Ramos. Let's say they don't get anyone in this next January transfer window, which is perfectly likely. From my point of view, I think that it's probably 50-50 whether United do actually get somebody.
Yes.
I will discuss. You've got one more on your list, have you? And we'll discuss some other potential names from the media.
Yes, I've got one more on my list. I've also got some honourable mentions, so I've ruled out for certain reasons that we could also talk about. But my number 3, so I ummed and ahed about this one. I've gone for Moussa Dembele at Lyon, who is having somewhat of a resurgence this season. 0.65 expected goals, basically 0.2 expected goals in Ligue 1. Now, I know people call it a farmers league. It very much is not a farmers league. It's probably still, I would argue, the 5th best league in the world. So those kind of numbers are worth taking seriously. He's more of a traditional number 9.
Messi and Mbappe both playing, and the two best players in the world who've just competed in the World Cup final. So can't be that bad.
Yes, yeah, and like there are many good players that have come from like other teams within that league repeatedly. So any player that's doing well in there should be taken seriously. But yeah, Moussa Dembele, he's more of a traditional number 9. He's got, I'd say his movement off the ball is probably one of his biggest strengths. He's someone who's going to be more playing on the last man and making those runs in behind, rather than being someone who's going to drop down, drop deep and start playing out from the back, which I think someone like Cunha would do a bit more of that. He's not as heavy a presser as Cunha or Ramos, but he still does. He does enough that I think Ten Hag would look at him and think, I could work with that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, pressing often is a result of what the manager wants rather than like a player's innate ability. You know, if you're looking at just their raw stats, but he does enough that I think Ten Hag would think, yeah, I could work with that. It's just that he is a different profile to Ramos and Cunha.
Yeah, and United have looked at him in the past as well. Another one. I mean, these are all stats led names that we're suggesting at the moment, but United did consider Moussa Dembele before deadline day in the summer. I think it was just after or just before the Antony move, where obviously United didn't get a central forward in the summer, but did get a massive money forward in the shape of Antony, obviously, to play on the right. And Dembele's still 26 and has been on this sort of periphery of a Premier League move for quite some time. Obviously was at Celtic and Fulham before that and did really well. And then I think people have forgotten about him a little bit, haven't they, since he went to Lyon?
They have and they haven't. I feel like his name crops up intermittently every now and then gets forgotten about. But yeah, I mean, he is a very, very good footballer, and I think he could play at a higher level than Lyon. Whether he'd be a out-and-out starter for United, I don't know. He also has the same savers score, 82. As literally every player on my list has a score of 82, funnily enough.
And Ronaldo's is 83.
Ronaldo's is 83. For full clarity, Messi's is 92. So for those that thought that Ronaldo and Messi were both on the decline, I mean, I would have told you before the World Cup that is very much not the case. And I guess now we all know it very much is not the case. Messi is still one of the best players in the world. But these guys, I know it's currently 82, but they should all have a bit more room to grow. But if you look at the amount of minutes played on average per position, at 26 is when strikers tend to peak. That's when they get most of their football. Our saver scores tend to peak a little bit higher, like 27, 28. So you could guess almost all of them, they should have a bit of growth. I mean, Ramos is 21, so he's got a lot of room to grow. Dembele is a bit further on, so maybe reaching his peak. But yeah, there's room to grow for all of them. None of them should get worse. And I think United have been guilty of signing players who get worse quite quickly after we sign them. And I think partly that's because they tend to be on the wrong side of that age curve that I just mentioned.
Especially strikers, and especially late in transfer windows when other options have been explored and exhausted from my point of view. Well, United have got a player in Anthony Martial. He's still 27, and I was going to bring this up earlier when we were discussing Ronaldo, that Martial has quickly become Ten Hag's preferred choice as the number 9. Hasn't been fit anywhere near enough to probably deserve that, and hasn't really shown the form beforehand. I know he had a very good pre-season, which people got very excited about, but that means very little in my mind. But do you think Martial can still be that man for Ten Hag, or the very fact that we're having this conversation about replacements and new signings suggests that United need to move on from Martial?
With Martial, it's almost not a question of what he can do on the pitch. It's just whether he can actually get on the pitch. I found this season so frustrating with that regard. Like, he had such a good pre-season. With the Ronaldo situation, it was perfectly set up for him to come in and make that position his own. And he was injured first game of the season. I mean, it's so frustrating. And it might not even be his fault. I mean, I don't know. I'm not his doctor. I don't have a clue what is actually going on. But there is a player there. and there always has been a player there, and United fans know that. But getting on the pitch consistently and putting in the performance consistently are what separate you from being a potential gem, wonder kid, which is what he was, to being a genuine superstar and being a player that a club like United can rely on. And he isn't that. I mean, his expected goals were 0.14 when he was on loan in La Liga. Yeah. So you're expecting a goal once every 6 or 7 games, which is ludicrously low. This season hasn't played a lot, so don't put too much weight on this. It's now 0.79, which has you as like one of the best strikers in world football. Admittedly, these are both like over 3. They're not over a lot of minutes of football,
small sample sizes.
Yeah, small sample size and all that. But it's the Martial story in a nutshell. You know, looking like a player who shouldn't even be at a top 5 European club, to looking like a player who could be one of the best players in those leagues in the space of a year. I mean, that is the Martial story in a nutshell.
It shows Ten Hag's faith,
so frustrating.
I think it shows Ten Hag's faith, those recent numbers, and what Martial can do. We all know that he won't mind people saying that he's quite a sensitive character. And I think that he's had his nose put out of joint a few times at United, rightly or wrongly. Sometimes I think it's been Martial reacting badly to rivals. So when Cavani came in,
Lukaku as well.
Yeah, Lukaku before that, and Ronaldo as well. And that's on Martial to do what Luke Shaw does. If you're to use a sort of an equivalent example, Luke Shaw has completely the opposite reaction, and he becomes a better player when they sign someone else for his position, such as Tellez and Malacia. But let's run through 3 names that are now being reported in the press for a potential Ronaldo replacement. Rob Dawson from ESPN is a good source on this, and his latest story says that Erik ten Hag has asked United to explore possibility of signing a Ronaldo replacement, with Cody Gakpo and Rafael Leao on the top of United's shortlist. So we know all about Gakpo. Links to him have been pretty incessant. And Leao's an interesting one as well, because a lot of people would have seen in the World Cup and thought he's probably more of a wide player.
He is more of a wide player. He almost exclusively plays on the left wing at AC Milan. I think earlier on in his career, he did play as a striker a little bit. And you can see how he has certain aspects to his game that could allow him to play as a number 9 in the Premier League. I mean, he's a giant for a winger. Gakpo's the same. He's tall, he's quick. I mean, he can carry the ball past players like they're not even there. He just brushes them aside. Like, he's great to watch. It's just whether he plays in a position that we actually need. That would be my concern, because I love him as a player. I think his save score was like 83. Like, he's a really, really good player. And you can see that he's got a lot of potential. It's just whether we need him, to be brutally honest. I'm just not sure if we do.
It's fair to say his best position, cutting in off the left, which seems to be everybody's favourite position at United over the past few years. Everybody's pretty much wanted to do that. Rashford, Sancho.
We've literally got an army of players that do that.
Yeah, Garnacho.
I mean, at least we
probably do that.
Yeah, I mean, at least with Gakpo, we've got someone who plays as a number 9 every now and then. I mean, he is more of a winger, but he has played as a number 9. I'm pretty sure he played as a number 9 for the Netherlands a little bit during the World Cup. He definitely has for PSV. So, yeah, I can see how that one makes more sense, and I'd be more happy with that as a signing. But yeah, with Leao, I just don't quite see how he fits. I really don't, unless players are leaving that we're not aware of.
Is there a sense with Gakpo? I think a lot of United fans were quite excited about him potentially signing in the summer. United went for Anthony instead, and I think that's worked out quite well so far. Anthony looks really good. He was a lot more expensive than Gakpo would have been, though. But Gakpo seemingly desperate for them, just as desperate for the move as Anthony was, and he did impress during the World Cup in central areas. Well, it's one of these where you might not be that complete elite striker, all round number 9 that United are. Well, maybe they're not wanting, but maybe that they need. But he does he does seem to have a high ceiling, and he does seem to be a Ten Hag style player.
I mean, having the ability to play as a 9 and a winger kind of works with what we've got as well. I mean, you think about Rashford, you think about Martial. If you have all those players on the pitch at the same time, you could rotate quite a lot. And I think that would be useful in certain game situations. So I can see why Ten Hag would like that. It's just with Rafael Leao, he plays on the wing so often. I just see him as a left winger for the time being. And like we said before, that's not what we want. We want someone who can play on the wing, but also someone that can play as a number 9 as well.
Is the same true of João Felix, another player who United have been linked with quite a lot, but who also isn't an out and out number 9?
No, João Felix is a weird one. Certain moments in his career, he looks like a world beater, and then he goes on these patches of form where he can't score for love nor money, and his expected goals take quite a big dip as well. But when you watch him, and this is I always say, you can't just use data to judge a player. You've got to watch them as well. Really, you need both before you can make any sort of judgment on a player. When you watch João Felix in moments, he does things that you just don't see many other players in world football doing, which is quite exciting. But he's not a traditional number 9, like you say. He's almost like a second striker. I mean, it feels like they barely exist anymore, but that's kind of what he is. He's sort of like the little man that perhaps would play off like a bigger player, and who can even drop down into like a number 10 position. So
I think he's at the wrong club in Atletico.
He is at the wrong club. He's exactly the wrong club. He's with the wrong manager. Atletico, for some reason, always love to get like a big name striker who comes in with their defensive system. But for him, I just don't quite see how it fits there. His work rate off the ball is okay, but it's not what Simeone wants. What Simeone wants is someone like Cunha, who works his butt off. I don't think João Felix is quite that. But look, if United were to sign João Felix, you'd hear no complaints from me. Because, I mean, there's somewhere in there as a superstar. I'm sure of it.
Not from a lot of fans as well. I think he would be maybe one of those where he's a bigger name than maybe what actually the United need, and maybe too big a name that
perhaps
it's a marketable signing rather than a functional signing, which doesn't seem very Ten Hag-like to me.
No, it does seem quite United-like though, so we'll see.
They've made these mistakes before, as we've discussed for many years, you and I.
Yeah.
So if we're going to rank the most likely, and then I'll say the most likely signing that we've discussed, I think, is Cody Gakpo. In terms of the best, out and out best one according to you and according to your numbers, who would you say?
So the most likely of the names I've spoken about, I think, is Cunha. I think because he's available, I think he's very obviously available given his links with Wolves. I think his stats output have actually been surprisingly good if you look under the hood, if you don't just look at raw goal numbers. The only thing I think will hold it back is because he hasn't scored that many goals, because he's not playing week in, week out, there will be those at United that think, can he play at the elite level? And those might be fair questions. I think that would hold it back. In terms of availability, he seems like the most available to me, apart from like Gakpo, who you mentioned before, who PSV are very clearly open to selling and who himself is very clearly open to moving. I think Cunha is probably the next most likely to want to go and be able to go. What do you think of that?
Well, I think Gakpo rather than Cunha, but we'll see. And there's, as we said before, there's a massive chance. We'll probably have to wrap up now, but there's a massive chance that United don't get someone in January, and that's not what I'm going to title this video or podcast, because people don't want to hear that. But yeah, that's a very
not very clickbaity.
No, but I don't operate on clickbait, as you know.
Yeah, look, I mean, the club's up for sale. They want to sell it within the first quarter of 2023. I think it's unlikely the Glazers are going to want to buy a player now. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense. The only thing I can think about that might increase the likelihood of us signing someone is the fact that Ronaldo's wages are no longer on the balance sheet, which frees up a lot of money. And I can see why Ten Hag could make quite a good case for that being reinvested. But my gut reaction is we're not going to sign anyone in January. But I can see why you wouldn't want to clip that.
Yeah, we will see. We'll end on that sour note, but hopefully United will do some business and we'll see what happens. But we will do lots of more of these shows. Alex is from Sabre Sports. I didn't describe it properly before, but it's a football data analytics app and agency, and he'll be bringing a lot more insight on the stats front to Name on the Trophy podcast over the coming weeks. So thank you, Alex, for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Never a chore. And you can leave us a like and a subscribe in all the usual podcast and YouTube places, and we'll be back again very soon. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.